Let's jump right in. Imagine a 12th century vision so terrifying that it was literally locked away in the Vatican vaults for centuries. Today, in this explainer, we're diving into the mystery behind Malachy's list. So, the story goes that an Irish archbishop named Saint Malachy visited Rome in 1139 and fell into this incredibly deep trance. And he didn't just see the immediate future, right? He supposedly saw a terrifying, unbroken sequence of every single pope that would ever rule, stretching all the way to the end of the world. He jotted these visions down as cryptic Latin phrases, one for every future pope, and handed the whole manuscript over to Pope Innocent II.
Now, the stakes here are absolutely apocalyptic. The final prediction on this list, it talks about the destruction of Rome. That's not exactly a comforting thought. It's basically a countdown. And Pope Innocent? He reportedly knew exactly how dangerous a document like this was. So legend has it, he locked the manuscript deep in the Vatican archives and never breathed a word about it again. For generations, we're talking hundreds of years, the world had absolutely no clue this doomsday timeline even existed.
But here's where things get kind of suspicious. There's this massive 450-year gap between Malachy supposedly writing this list in 1139 and its sudden miraculous discovery. It wasn't until 1590, right in the middle of a papal conclave following the sudden death of Pope Urban VII, that this document just mysteriously surfaces. Can you imagine the shock of those cardinals? They're gearing up to elect a new leader, and out of nowhere, a 4.5-century-old document drops into their laps, claiming that every single pope's identity has already been predetermined by a saint.
So, faced with this unbelievable document, 16th century scholars furiously set to work verifying the first 74 popes on the list. And honestly, what they found was astonishing. They matched these incredibly specific, impossibly accurate Latin mottos to actual historical figures. Take the first pope on the list, Celestine II. His motto was "From a castle on the Tiber." And wouldn't you know it, he was born in a castle town right on the banks of the Tiber River. Or how about Pope Urban III? His motto was literally "Pig in a sieve." Sounds totally absurd, right? Well, until you realize his family name actually meant sieve in Italian, and their family crest had an actual pig on it. I mean, the scholars verifying this found that Malachy was right 74 times in a row.
And the eerie accuracy didn't just stop in the 16th century. The predictions kept hitting the bullseye well past that 1590 discovery date. The connections are seriously striking. Pope Pius VII was identified as the rapacious eagle. Well, he was famously kidnapped and held prisoner by Napoleon, whose soldiers marched under, you guessed it, a bronze eagle standard. Pius IX was cross from a cross, and he ended up losing his papal lands to the House of Savoy, whose emblem was a white cross. And perhaps the most famous one, John Paul II, was perfectly described as the labor of the sun. He was born on the exact day of a solar eclipse and buried on the day of another. Because of this sheer accuracy, people started looking with absolute dread toward the very last entry on the list, Petrus Romanus, or Peter the Roman. So when Pope Francis took the throne after Benedict's shocking resignation, the prophecy really seemed to be unfolding right in front of us. I mean, Francis is the son of Italian immigrants, so he's got Roman blood. His father was literally named Pietro, and his reign immediately faced immense global tribulations, scandals, a global pandemic. You remember those empty rain-slick squares in Rome? To many, Francis was, without a doubt, Peter the Roman, the final pope before the city of Seven Hills would fall.
But the sequence of popes continued, right? A new pope was elected, and the world remained entirely intact. So scholars dove back into the text and realized that a pretty fascinating mistake had been made centuries ago. Back in 1624, an editor named Thomas Messingham printed the prophecy with a critical misprint. He essentially merged two distinct sentences into one single paragraph. By splitting those sentences back up exactly as they were originally written in Latin, it turns out Peter the Roman wasn't necessarily the very next pope in line. The true countdown was actually still ticking.
So if the prophecy wasn't counting down the actual men on the throne, what exactly was it counting? Well, according to analysts of the original Latin texts, there is a hidden mathematical countdown buried directly inside the list, and it points to one specific year, 2027.
Okay, let's break down this hidden math of doom, because it's pretty wild. Deep in the middle of Malachy's list is a motto reading, "The axle in the middle of the sign." This motto belonged to Pope Sixtus V, who was elected in 1585. Now, if you take the very first pope on the list in 1143 and count forward exactly 442 years, you hit 1585. It's the exact middle. It's the axle. And if you count forward another 442 years from that axle, the timeline points straight to the year 2027.
And just to make that 2027 date even more terrifying, astronomers confirmed that a massive 6-minute solar eclipse will cover the Mediterranean and the old Roman world on August 2nd of that very year. Its shadow is going to trace a direct line right across Spain, North Africa, and Egypt. Remember how the list marked a pope with the labor of the sun? Well, now, the entire timeline seems slated to end exactly when the sun goes dark over the ruins of the Roman Empire. That's a pretty cinematic coincidence, wouldn't you say?
But all right, let's step back for just a second here. How on earth did an Irish monk in the year of 1139 see the family crests of popes living hundreds of years in the future? How did he predict Napoleon's bronze eagle or the exact phrasing of a 16th century Italian family name? Well, when we pull back the curtain and actually look at the historical record, the magic starts to fade pretty rapidly.
The illusion completely shatters when you notice a glaring difference in the document's accuracy. If you look at the popes prior to 1590, which just happens to be the exact year the document was suddenly discovered, the mottos are impossibly precise. They perfectly match obscure hometowns and unique family crests. But after 1590, the mottos instantly become incredibly vague, just relying on generalized references to animals, weather, and the cross. Why? Well, it's pretty simple. The author just ran out of recorded history. They could easily copy the past, but they had to blindly guess the future.
And the historical record gives us even more damning evidence. First off, Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, who was a close friend of Malachy and wrote his detailed biography, never once mentions a world-ending papal prophecy. Not a peep. But honestly, the funniest piece of evidence? This supposedly infallible, divinely inspired list actually blindly plagiarized printed typos. It perfectly copies mistakes from a history book published by Onofrio Panvino in 1557. For example, the list identifies Pope John XXII with the motto of a shoemaker. Now, his father was actually a banker, but Panvino's book mistakenly called him a shoemaker. So this mysterious prophetic vision simply copied a 16th century printing error.
So if it wasn't a 12th century saint writing this, who was it? The real motive becomes hilariously clear when you remember that the document conveniently surfaced during the highly contested papal election of 1590. One of the top candidates running for pope was Cardinal Girolamo Simoncelli. And wouldn't you know it, the very next motto on the prophetic list just happened to be from the Old City. It is absolutely no coincidence that Simoncelli's hometown was Orvieto, which in Latin translates directly to, you guessed it, the Old City. The entire terrifying apocalyptic document was most likely just 16th century election propaganda rigged to secure a vote. And the kicker? Simoncelli still lost the election.
So this brings up a huge question. If we know this document is a verified forgery built on plagiarized typos and political ambition, why does it keep resurfacing? Why are we so magnetically drawn to mathematical countdowns, solar eclipses, and end-of-the-world predictions? Why does the idea of an impending apocalypse completely captivate both secular and religious cultures alike?
I think the answer lies in a shared psychological reality. Look, we all carry a deep existential dread of our inevitable mortality. We know for absolute certainty that our lives will end, but we don't know exactly when, and we don't know how. Psychologically speaking, we would much rather frame our ultimate end as part of a grand, purposeful cosmic drama, like a final judgment or some epic cataclysm, rather than facing the terrifying reality of a random, uncontrollable illness or accident. The apocalypse, in a weird way, gives the end of our story an epic meaning. Ultimately, the mystery behind Malachy's list isn't really about predicting the future of the popes at all. It's really a mirror reflecting our own anxieties about time running out. We can't control how many days we have left, whether the year is 2027 or decades from now. But we can control what we do with the present. Instead of dreading a theatrical end of the world, we should probably focus on building something that lasts. Which leaves us with the real question for this explainer. If you knew exactly when the clock would stop,